Marvel Snap is getting better at balance, and it's stretching your resources. In March 2024, Marvel Snap released 5 cards. The first was Hope Summers on the Season Pass. Next up was Pixie, followed by Mockingbird, Cannonball, and War Machine. With the exception of War Machine, who was very hyped but didn't really deliver, all of these cards ended up being common sights on my tier list. In fact, one of my most recently posted decks that I devoted a full video to plays a full 3 of these cards. Going back to February, we see a fairly similar pattern, but with one miss located in a different area. The card that missed in February was Black Swan, but Proxima Midnight, Corvus Glaive, Cull Obsidian, and even Supergiant have all been clearly powerful and have appeared on my tier list on multiple occasions. April 2024 looks much the same, but ramped up, with Baron Zemo on the Season Pass, followed by Red Hulk, Red Guardian, US Agent, and White Widow. 4 of these cards have a play rate north of 15% in the top 10% of Infinite, with White Widow and Red Hulk being among the most played cards in the entire game. The only one of these cards that doesn't have a play rate north of 15% in that cohort has an obscene win rate and cube rate, albeit in a very low sample size, and was buffed a week after release. You'll notice Valentina wasn't on this list. I didn't feel like we had enough time to have enough data gathered that I felt confident putting her on there, but she seems pretty strong too, I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, I've been playing a pretty decent amount of Valentina. I just didn't want to like throw her on there and then, 4 weeks later, it's like, she's actually not that good. The data bears that out. I wanted to stick to cards we actually had the info for. It wasn't always like this. This was not always how Marvel Snap was balanced. So, how did we get here? From September to December, 8 cards were released into Marvel Snap that were absolutely busted. Loki, Miss Marvel, Mobius, Blob, the list goes on, and you can see it right next to me. Each one of these cards had to take a very significant nerf, with the least significant nerf being dealt to Annihilus, arguably, which lost the ability to send over cards with 0 power and also lost a point of power on his own. This is typical for how these cards ended up getting dealt with. Many of them saw energy increases or fundamental additional hoops to jump through, like Miss Marvel. This is not the kind of nerf that a card like Red Hulk got. These nerfs were serious. They really had to deal with these cards. Many of them received an energy buff. Some of them are an energy nerf, I should say. I don't know how you describe it. They cost more now, and that is a much more serious hit to them than anything they've done recently. Loki ate an energy nerf and had its interaction with Collector totally removed. Alioth was reworked multiple times, losing power, then part of its ability, then all of its ability. Mobius was reworked twice, eventually setting in at its original power, but costing 1 more. Elsa Bloodstone ended up with an additional energy cost and -1 to the power that she grants. Werewolf by Night saw a +1 energy nerf that actually came close to killing the card. Ms. Marvel lost a power and saw an added restriction on her ability, making her harder to use. Annihilus lost a power and is still one of the absolute best cards in the entire game. Blob basically got his top-end output cut in half. So obviously, something had to change. They had to stop releasing super broken stuff and then nerfing it. And to their credit, they have absolutely done that. In the 4 months from January on to where we are now, maybe even you could call it 5 months, depending on where you ballpark when this ended, whether you end it with the Blob nerf or you end it with, the last time they released something messed up, only 1 new card has actually been nerfed, and that is Red Hulk. And I think if you ordered all of those changes to all of those cards and you put them all in a line, Red Hulk's nerf would rate as the least impactful of all 9 of them, which means they have gotten significantly better at balancing for the top end. That is a good thing, right? Well, there's another side to it. From September to December, Marvel Snap saw 7 totally awful cards released. Ravonna Renslayer, Man-Thing, Black Knight, Gladiator, Martyr, Havoc, and Selene. You'll notice there's no Selene in this collection. That's because I still don't own her. That's how bad she is. I know people are going to be mad at the inclusion of Ravonna and Gladiator here, but there's some stuff to remember here, all right? Ravona released as a freaking 3-3. Gladiator released as a 3-7 that had America Chavez still in the metagame. Celine actually released as negative power and is now a 1-2, and Black Knight released as a card where the Ebony Blade didn't have the text it does now. It was just dying to Shang-Chi and dying to Shadow King all the time. It had none of that text. What I'm getting at here is that it used to be easier to skip cards. There were hits and there were misses, and you could kind of tell which one that actually was going to be. These were not cards that got super hyped or anything like that. These were cards that most people were like, okay, this looks pretty bad, and then it was pretty bad, which allowed players to budget and save up for the big hits that would really upgrade their collections. This isn't happening anymore. Every card is good, and I totally understand why you as a design team would want every card to be good. Duh. You don't necessarily need them all to be amazing overpowered, but you want them to be exciting and compelling. And one really easy way to make those cards exciting and compelling is to make them either very exciting, a la War Machine or Grandmaster, or very good, a la Hope Summers. There are multiple ways to do this, but those are by far the two easiest. Because if you do not release a card that is good, it's basically like not releasing a card at all. It's like the game, nothing actually happened in it. The card has to be good enough for people to actually play, or at the very least, exciting enough for people to play, a la Grandmaster or War Machine. And even cards like that look like easy skips maybe, or that look like they're not easy skips, the fact that it's getting harder to tell also impacts this. I get so many people in my comments when they're like, oh my god, KM, I spent 4 caches on War Machine. I didn't get Cannonball, and I just don't know what to tell them. Because the design team is so good at making all of these cards look exciting, and their track record is amazing on it, right? Like, they're going back and they're buffing cards. If a card misses low, they're like, yeah, a week later, we're just going to make it good. Like US Agent, their track record is really good. But what that means is that it's very hard to figure out what you're actually supposed to buy. I think that this creates a pervasive feeling that is similar to decision paralysis, where you aren't really sure what you should do with your caches in order to use them as optimally as possible. This also creates an additional issue, where many of Marvel Snap's decks are collections of good cards, and they keep releasing good cards. This is very obviously seen in April's cards, where almost all of them are above 15% play rate, all of them are above 50% win rate, and 2 of them are among the top 2 most played cards in top 10% infinite. Sorry, top 5. My bad. I'm leaving it in. And that is bad. I don't really know another way around that, right? People get mad at it like it's power creep, but it's not necessarily power creep, but like how many Red Hulk decks are out there that are also White Widow decks, right? How many Pixie decks are out there that are also Mockingbird Cannonball decks? And if you're not spending money at the time those cards come out, well, I mean, I'm sorry, you can't have them, right? Pixie, Mockingbird, Cannonball, all 3 of those were in a deck I just put on my YouTube channel. And if you were not spending money, you cannot get them. You had to have been spending money at the time to get all 3 of them. There is no other way, because they were in back-to-back-to-back caches. And a free-to-play player, unless they're getting incredibly lucky, cannot acquire that. They simply cannot do it. And even some spenders will find themselves hard-pressed to open cache after cache after cache. I really do wonder if there are some deleterious effects because of this. So let's talk solutions. I think there are 2 solutions to this problem. The first is a total rework of the economy, and I think we all know that's probably not going to happen, and I'm not really the person to talk about that. But the second is something that can be done on the balance side, and I think it's a little bit more interesting. What I mean is using series drops to curate the amount of things that are in series 4 and 5 so they show up in the caches more regularly, and at the same time buffing older cards to be reasonably competitive with these new options. I don't want the only good stuff decks in Marvel Snap to require, I don't know, 4 or 5 of the past 8 cards released. I think that is an untenable situation. So I have a 2-pronged solution. We're going to talk about cards I think can get buffed, and then we're going to talk about cards I think can get series dropped. Now, keep in mind, I am trying to buff these cards to like relative playability, so they might end up coming a little bit strong in terms of how you evaluate them. But keep in mind, again, I'm trying to make them like really legitimately good. So take that with a grain of salt. First up is Okoye. People don't remember this, but Okoye used to be an incredibly powerful card. When it was released, it was a 2/2 that gave +2 to all the cards in your deck at the time you played it, very similar to Prince Keleseth in Hearthstone. They quickly realized that this was a little bit too powerful, so they nerfed her to a 1/1. That 1/1 was also a little bit too powerful, even though she lost a power on her ability. She was a 1/1 that gave +1 to all the cards in your deck, and that means that people were playing her in bounce decks with Falcon and Beast. So here's my pitch. I think she can be a 1/1 again. I seriously do. This is a Series 2 card, but the cards that make it very powerful are Falcon and Beast. Those are in Series 3. Like, that Beast especially is like a very key component of how you want this card to play out. You need it to play a deck with it. That is a Series 3 card. I am not worried about messing up the early collection here. I think it would be good for Bounce to have an additional thing that is doing additionally cool stuff. I think it would be good for there to be a Series 3 type deck that people can take and improve with cards in Series 4 and 5 like Nico Minoru, and I think concentrating some of that power in a card like Okoye is a good way to accomplish this. So, first proposal, Okoye goes to 1/1. Next up is Ultron. Another thing people don't remember is that Ultron had a ton of relevance in the early years of Marvel Snap. And, I mostly mean like right up until Loki came out. Ultron Patriot was a real deck. It was Patriot alongside Destroy and Discard that you would build towards out of the sort of Series 3 mess of things. And I think Ultron has been relatively power crept, and I think this is a fixable situation. So here is my pitch for Ultron. I think the Doombots can be 2s. That's what I think. I think if you make these bots, I said Doombots, it is what it is. If you make them 2s, they become comparable to Doombots. This suddenly becomes a card where you are really putting a lot of power in a lot of other locations. That is what it takes for a card like this to be good. It is incredibly unplayable right now. Now, in order to do this, I think you would have to sacrifice some power here. I could see Ultron being like a 6/5 with this ability. That seems pretty appealing to me. Because if it's a 6/5 with this ability, you're looking at like a very reasonably large number. It's comparable to Doctor Doom, but if you have less space, Doctor Doom is better. If you have more space, this is better. You have synergy with Patriot. I think that Ultron can create drones with 2 power. Attuma. Attuma is a strong card, kind of, if you look only at the numbers and not at the text of the card. I think that Cull Obsidian's release has demonstrated that 410 with a minor downside is actually just like a fine thing to have around. It's not like it's overpowering the metagame now that Thanos isn't really a big part of it. So what if Attuma, which has a much more severe downside, was a little bit bigger? My pitch? Attuma should be a 412. This also applies, in my mind, to Typhoid Mary, who I think could very reasonably be a 411. Straight up, I think Claw could get a +2 power buff. Now, I realize this is probably the most controversial of all of these because Claw is a Series 1 card that is played a lot there, and balance in Series 1 is something that has to be considered. However, Claw is fundamentally like pretty fun. A fun card to have around, a fun card, a good card. Like, I think this is the kind of card that should exist, that should force people to think about it, that should make it profitable to play for multiple lanes, to put power on closed off locations. I think the game is better when there are more of these effects that are good. And I think Claw, especially when you compare it to other 5-drops, just comes up lacking in terms of power. My personal belief is there are basically 2 kinds of playable 5-drops. There are Devil Dinosaurs and there are Legions. Devil Dinosaurs, the archetype, of course, is Devil Dinosaur. It's a 5, and then it gets arbitrarily large. Ronin and Darkhawk, those are Devil Dinosaurs. Legions are the utility 5/7 to 5/9s that everyone seems to be playing, right? Cannonball, that's a Legion. Legion, that's a Legion. Lady Deathstrike, that's a Legion. And I think the fact that these cards exist and Claw is still at 5/4 is kind of ridiculous. Like, this card could very easily be worse than any of those cards at 5/6. Like, if this were 5/7, then we'd be talking about the range Lady Deathstrike is in, but like, this is a card that very reasonably could just be a 5/6, and that wouldn't even be an issue. And so I think it should be a 5/6. Finally, Miles Morales. Miles Morales is a 4-5 right now, and that is not enough reward either from his effect or from his power. I have a pitch that is, I think, probably pretty severe, but I'm not even sure it will make him playable. That's just how strong the metagame is right now. I think Miles Morales should have 6 power and discount to 0. I think that one of the major things that I'm seeing when I play this card is that he's not a big enough body, and I'm not as easily able to weave him in as I would like. Many Miles Morales decks are playing things like Kitty Pryde that is taking up that 1 energy. You want to be able to free roll this card because you're investing in Silk and Craven, but it's gotten to the point that I'm cutting Silk and Craven from the Silky Smooth deck, rendering it neither silky nor smooth. And I think we want more payoffs for running that small move package, and Miles Morales should be that payoff, but he's just not good enough right now. I think he should be a 4-6 that discounts to 0. These are just a few ideas for cards that I think can be raised out of obscurity and into the range of playability. One of the major things I looked for with these cards was not necessarily cards that everyone has, but cards that can be sort of tentpole build-arounds for their archetype. Cards that reward you for investing in them, like Atuma, like Miles Morales, like Ultron. I want these cards to be the kind of thing that you build around, and you can take those cards and the decks that they are in into a competitive scenario. And right now, I don't think you can do that because you're going to run into good card soup. And my solution to good card soup is make there be more good cards. So if you have any suggestions for cards you think can get buffed, please do leave them in the comments below. I think this is a very open-ended discussion, and I only think this is one part of what I would do if I were running Second Dinner, what I think needs to happen, but I do think something like this does need to happen. Another thing that can alleviate the issues with the amount of good cards being released is series drops. Now, what I'm going to do is propose a list of series drops that only the greediest people in the world would do. I am going to give you series drops that I think are directly tied to power. I think we're going to specifically try to drop just bad cards, cards that aren't good, or cards that are mediocre but exciting to play around with the tools that a Pool 3 player has. I am going to assume the worst here. And I think even in assuming the worst, this accomplishes the goal, looking at series drops as a whole, of making it so that cards rotate back into spotlights sooner. If you missed out on Pixie or Mockingbird in favor of War Machine, you're not going to see either of those in spotlights for like 5 months after that happened. And that is because there are so many cards in Series 5 and Series 4. So if we assume that they're going to be as greedy as possible, which I honestly don't assume, but sure, you might, we are still going to benefit from even the reduction in size of Series 5 and Series 4. My proposals: Echo, Ghost Spider, Howard the Duck, Martyr, Havoc, Zabu, Hitmonkey, and Dakin. None of these cards are cards people are seriously opening for. We can be real about that. From Series 5, Grandmaster, Silk, Jean Grey, Sebastian Shaw, Black Swan, Hercules, Eliath, and Scar can all get downgraded. Another card that can get downgraded is Celine. My personal theory is I kind of think these cards could get downgraded to Series 3 and it wouldn't impact bottom lines at all, but at a bare minimum, I think they can be downgraded to Series 4. Not to put too fine a point on it, but even if they dropped all of these cards, the contents of Series 4 and 5 would still be extremely desirable. There wouldn't even be a lack of filler cards in there. There are still other cards that I did not cover. I just picked what I felt were the 8 most egregious in Series 4 and the 8 most egregious in Series 5. Just doing that would go a long way. It would bring the total number of cards in Series 4 and 5 down by about 20%, and therefore mean that cards would rotate into the caches at a clip of 20% faster, which is an upgrade by any definition. So, to sum up, I think they've gotten way better at releasing cards, but that has caused there to be a higher stress on your resources. In order to fix that problem, I think they need to be more aggressive by buffing older cards and by utilizing series drops. It doesn't even matter if they're incredibly greedy about it. It's still super upside for the people who are playing this game because they rotate into the caches at a faster rate. And of course, buffing older cards is something that doesn't necessarily create value for them, but it does allow players to keep up, and you need players to be able to keep up if you want to keep the game afloat. Thank you for bearing with me through this long-ass discussion. I realize it was kind of a ridiculously long thing to do. I totally understand. A lot of just me ranting, a lot of just me talking. Let me know what you think about the problem and then my solutions, because I think that the problem is very clear to me. They're releasing too many good cards too close to each other, and you just can't really get them all, and I think that is an issue. But the solutions, I think, are still sort of up in the air. My solution pitch here was basically, I want to do something that will cost them no money and will meaningfully improve the experience. And that's sort of where I got to with this. That's sort of my theory of this. So please do let me know what you think in the comments. I, as always, have been Cam Best. You, of course, have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.